I'm really happy with how today went. This wasn't a bad day. I got quite a bit of stuff done, and I have started off with a project that I wasn't totally sure I could pull off, but I dove in, and it seems to be going really well. It's a collaboration effort, just kind of it'll be really cool. I think it's going to be really cool in the end. I can't wait to see what the final thing is going to look like. And it's one where I am doing one bit of artwork and another artist is doing another bit of art. And we're going to, from what the way is I'm understanding, we're going to review and look over the artwork and kind of talk about it both ways. So I'm really interested to see how this is going to go. And so far, just on that one project, just out of that specific drawing element, I've gotten about 2.5 hours into that, and I've still got about another 2-3 hours. But the good thing is I can put that on the side plate for a little bit and get back to some of the other ones that I really need to focus on as well too. That's always a challenge, right? I don't know how the rest of you guys manage your time or do things, but there's days whenever I just don't want to do shit. I talked about that just in this last video, with the whole toy car thing, not being able to grab the thing and, feeling kind of stuck. And there are days when I really do feel just fucking stuck. I can't move forward. I can't do anything. And I was really scared today was going to head that way because I woke up with another migraine, but I was like, no, I can't. I don't have time for that today. It would have been a fiasco if I had not been able to get stuff done today. So, loaded up on some headache medicine, and I got through it. It wasn't fun. It never is. I wish I understood why I backed up on stuff so much as far as projects and work. It'll happen to me all the time where I'm like stuck on something and I get really focused in on a zone with a particular project and I don't know how to kind of pepper in the other elements in there. I know it goes beyond list making, right? Because I've got lists. I've got all kinds of stuff like that. I've got a to-do list up on the board. I got one on this phone. They rarely work as effectively as I would like them to. Some of that has come from being able to manage my own time as a working professional within my own studio and trying to find time to do things like this, which could be considered extracurricular, but it still has a point and a focus for me, to the working freelance stuff I have, to my comic book, to any number of things, and just trying to find pockets of time within a day to put it in. One of the weirdest things is that I don't keep normal hours by most people's standards. I hated getting up early to go anywhere, but I love getting up early. If I'm camping or if I don't have to be somewhere, I will absolutely get up 5-6 in the morning to watch the sunrise. That is absolutely one of my favorite freaking things to do. I just love it. But if I have to get up and then get dressed and get going and be in rush hour traffic, fuck that. It's not fucking happening. I can't do it. I can't bring myself to do that. It just becomes one of those things where I'm like, man, this is kind of bullshit. And then like getting in and all that other stuff. Now it's mainly that, right? And even doing freelance, I've had to do that, and oh my God, I've had some close calls. I've just bad circumstances, in traffic and stuff where I'm like, man, this is not it. So I'm fighting like crazy to stay in this zone. It's really an interesting thing because whenever I talk about time management, I almost always end up also seeing that with other people, especially on TikTok. A lot more artists are willing to be open about the struggles they're going through and why and what they have going on. And I've seen a few people that have been talking about how, I just started sketching today, and before I knew it, 8-9 hours of my day was gone. And something there clicked for me, because I tend to be that same sort of person where I will think if I have 10 hours in a day that I'm going to get a billion things done. I'm going to clean this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to work on this. I'm going to complete this, and this. And I'm going to get started on those other 3 things. And I'm going to have such an incredibly progressive and just satisfactory day. And that's just not it. That's not going to happen. I have known people that can hammer through a day that way, and I just don't have that much caffeine in my system. I just don't. I don't understand how people do it. I don't get it. I never have. And there were some things I finally had to relent on, some things that I've talked about this before. letting things go, doing that sort of stuff. But I really, for a long time, thought, okay, as long as I can make a list, as long as I can do something with that, I should be fine and be able to get things accomplished. Today, yeah, I got some stuff accomplished, and there's this whole thing where I'm starting to understand that I should be happy that I'm getting the things I am done, and then refocusing my efforts the next day to get the other things. But it takes time for me to get something done and done right. And that's especially true with any freelance work I'm doing for people and my own projects. I want to present my best both ways. I want to be able to make sure I'm doing that. And maybe the end result in all of this is that I'm really trying to, once again, I'm trying to build up a safety zone financially for myself so that I can step back, and then maybe the second half of this year, really slow down, focus on what I'm creating, focus on the studio space, because there's still some areas that I need to get cleared up to get back to working on some other things. I had projects that were just sitting by the side because there's no room for them, that I can make more content here on YouTube, like how-tos and other things like that. And it's always a daily struggle. I'm not complaining. No, not even complaining about it. I am very lucky in a lot of ways that I'm able to survive outside of working a 9-to-5 job, or 8 to 6 as they really are, or any sort of 40-hour and plus week job. The challenge is, like with some of my clients, chasing after them, hey, you haven't paid me yet, or whatever. When those things happen, that can be a little bit annoying, a little bit frustrating, but I also think about it that, I would be doing that in a lot of other ways anyway. Even if I was working a full-time job, I would still be trying to do freelance, still be trying to do other stuff. I've spoken to a few people on TikTok, because this is something that comes up all the time about finding that personal time, finding a good way to manage our days and figure out, like, how do we still get life done and the other things. I'm still trying to figure that out. I use all kinds of time schedulers and things. For the most part, they can work. And then there's also time blocking, where weekly you sit down and you go, well, this is my Monday, this is my Tuesday, and so forth. It's not that hard. It's very much akin to, well, I'm going to go to work at this time. And it's weird, because when you're hired at a job and you have to physically go somewhere, you can't get out of that, right? You walk away from your job, you could quit, you could do whatever. But for the most part, if you want the paycheck and if you want to get things done and you want the job security, you go, you do the thing, and then you get paid, hopefully, if everything works out right. And I know that there's plenty of times whenever that just doesn't really occur to me the way that it should. And prioritizing my own projects and others and giving them a level of importance that I need to stick to is just fucking hard sometimes. I think a lot of it stems from the fact that for the good majority of my life, whenever I worked jobs, they were always on site. I needed to be there that 100%. And when I did freelance, which I've done for many years anyway, all that stuff was like extra. It was an additional factor. And I've mentioned this before. Sometimes I'd work 2 or 3 jobs for a long time. This is the real talk. I would have a job at a studio or anywhere else doing graphic design, art, whatever. And then I worked weekends and holidays doing security. And then I still did freelance. And technically a 4th job was doing comic shows, art shows, whatever I could find. So for a long time, for I'd say a good 13-year period, it was a fucking whirlwind. And I don't even remember how I did it. I have some video journals that I did back then, like weird little one-offs where I'm like, okay, I'm really stressed, or, oh, this is really weird. And I have them from those times when I was much younger. It's a trip to watch because, number one, I can't believe how long it's been. Number two, it's weird to see the kind of energy that I had at that point. Even when I was building the studio, I had a completely different thing happening. When this studio was being built, it was the exact same time that I first found out I was diabetic. And I'd only get so far. I'd get like a 2x4 installed, start sweating. I didn't know I was diabetic yet. It was horrible. So there's a lot of history tied into this studio in that moment. And I remember that was kind of the beginning of this weird downslide trend that I was going through, where I was able to get less and less done. And it was really, you know, I don't want to use the word killing me. That's too extreme in that zone, but it felt like I was just, you know, to coin, you know, to take that phrase from Bilbo Baggins, like, you know, butter scraped thinly over too much bread. It felt like that. And it was a really weird time for me because I started feeling like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. But somehow I kept going, and I wasn't my healthiest. I had it was weird because at one point, like doing security, doing other things, the walking, the physical activities, sometimes the altercations, things like that, they keep you on your toes. I was like, okay, well, I'll lift weights a little bit more. I'll do this. I'll get some walks in. But mentally I was shot, and I think I wasn't as able to organize things as much as I was able to go, well, I have no choice. I have a work shift I have to go to. So for a long time, I thought I was fairly organized. Now, something that came up in my last therapy session was, you know, well, where do you think this whole problem stems from, you know, trying to get through your day and do stuff? And they were like, you know, how was, you know, like, so then it was breaking down what my work areas are like, you know, and there's some dishevelment back here and a bunch of shit here and things are in disarray. But I do have an area that I can film and work in and do stuff on. So I have that. When I worked the last pivotally corporate job that I worked at when I was still at Hallmark, my workspace was immaculate. I would get there on time, spend about 5 minutes kind of getting my stuff in order and jump right into work. And then about 10 minutes before my close down time, I almost said close down time like a restaurant, before I'd head home, I would start to put things away and organize stuff, write notes to myself, and boom, I was done. For the most part, I was able to do that because, quite frankly, I was part-time contract. In that circumstances, at that point when I was still going in, I didn't have a lot of time to work there. So the few times I did go in, if there was a little bit of downtime, it gave me a little extra time to figure out stuff and things, but I could get projects done more succinctly and quickly. And I had a beginning and end game to everything. And then I knew, okay, I'm done, I'm out. And I kind of got used to that. And I thought, okay, this won't be hard to jump into freelance and do that sort of thing. Much to my chagrin, it really did kind of fuck up over this last year, like really badly. Some of it was when I was working at the museum, the hours were so weird because I was going in like, man, I've even forgotten. Like, I scoured so much of that from my brain, just the hours I was working. I want to say that I went in at like 4 and got off at like 2 a.m., something like, it was a weird shift. I was so messed up. And it was over the weekends too. So it was just a weird shift. And the more I think about it, I'm convinced that the only reason I got anything done was because so much of my life was already, you know, staggered into these moments of work again, go back to work, take some time off, but you can't really relax because you still got to work, and then do this again. I wasn't just doing 40 hours. I was doing much more. There were times in my career when I was working 60, 70 hours a week. And I didn't really count the comic and the show things. I just didn't, because that would have made me like literally insane. And the bad part was when I got hired on at the museum and I was still working part-time at Hallmark, I wasn't able to do shows. And I remember that was a big point of contention because I'd already made these adjustments. I was like, well, look, I paid for these shows ahead of time. I'll take this job, but I still want to be able to do art shows. And I thought, oh, being a museum, maybe they'd understand that sort of thing. But that's not how the scheduling worked for security. There was very tight, very hard. God help you if you were running even a few minutes late because somebody else had to stay there. And I understand that in security, you can't have that kind of leeway, you know. At bars, it happened all the time, and you just kind of lived with it. I mean, what else were you going to do? But this one was different. And I think in there somewhere, I started to snap a little bit more because I felt like I couldn't get away from things. I felt like I was just stuck in a rut. And thankfully, speaking to other people in my life at that time, you know, just plenty of people I knew that worked other jobs or were still at Hallmark, there were other places and things, I was able to figure out like, no, I'm definitely heading toward burnout if I'm not already there, and I need to change. What I wasn't prepared for was just how bad and how weird the change was going to affect me. to the point to where not only did I struggle through the rest of the time after I left the museum trying to stay freelance, I ramrodded myself into doing freelance so hard that I was struggling to keep all that shit straight. I couldn't function. And unfortunately, some of my clients were just like, oh, so you're not working on like a real job, which hurt, right? It was weird that they said that. Like they almost didn't consider my contract work to be a real job. And my mentality was so messed up at that time. I was like, I just took it for what it was worth and just moved on. I kind of ignored it. But I became very aware of a situation where once I stopped working for what would be deemed full-time jobs, suddenly my availability was no longer in question. And I had clients calling me all the time. Now, recently, in sort of a kind of path of discovery thing, I went and I did therapy, and I found out, I wish I had the sheet from my therapist, but I don't, where there's three sorts of, the word is escaping me now. It's basically like a, not like a public circle, but it's kind of like being able to hold yourself, you know, within three different circles of, one is I'm willing to let anyone in, I'm willing to trust anyone, and I'm kind of a super people pleaser. This one's like a moderate thing of boundaries. It was boundaries. It was little to no boundaries, healthy boundaries, and then fuck off boundaries. And I was seriously on both ends of it. I think it was bipolarism or some shit. I was not well because when I was getting pushed out of Hallmark, I was so mad at what was happening to me there. At the same time, I was relieved because it was a really weird situation and I didn't like the work I was doing. And then the museum was just expecting more and more, and there was no real methodology for going up, for being able to do anything extra. And there were a lot of circumstances there that really got me upset because I wanted to do more, but there are jobs that you guys know what I'm talking about. They're just jobs where you're like, no, this is what you do. And if you work here 2 years or 28 years, this is all you're ever going to do. And some people are fine with that, but that's not me. So after I walked away from that, it suddenly became more aware that I had more free time, but instead of doing the smart thing and kind of like laying low and doing some freelance stuff, I just jumped into the other one because I got paranoid about income. I got paranoid about, Lord, am I going to be able to pay for all these shows? Because I knew what was coming, right? At that point, I was like, oh, here's that big chance to go for the big shows, to do all these shows this next year. And, oh, fuck, that didn't go right. But it just didn't. But there were some successes, but not a lot. And because of that, I completely lost my mind, because then I was building up for shows. I was trying to create new things, but I wasn't doing the right things, or I was doing what I thought was right at the time. Turned out they weren't. It's the nature of business and art. And then clients were calling at various hours. I'd get an email on Saturdays or Sundays, and I had no boundaries. So I'm like, no, it's cool. I'll do it. And then every morning waking up either with a headache or frustrated or pissed off at myself, thinking, fuck, I can't do these other things I want to do. I single-handedly wiped out the majority of my hobbies, just killed them. And a weird thing that I discovered recently was that I didn't think it was possible to not be into doing a hobby anymore. And it took some real effort these last probably 7 or 8 months to even get myself to foster any interest in doing those things again. I have just now, and this is complete transparency, I have just now fostered a rebirth of love about what I'm drawing. And I spoke this last video about, the thing that sparks you, and Soul the movie and all that. Well, it was similar. I kept looking for that spark in my artwork and stuff, and I wasn't finding it. And there are still days I'm still not. But there were moments whenever I started letting myself go with wild abandon into whatever I was doing. I was just pushing myself into an area where I was like, okay, I don't know or care where this is going to go, but I've got to breathe. I've got to be able to do more. and it was definitely a fucking struggle. There's no lie there. It was absolutely something I was scared shitless of. And when I made the decision that I wasn't going to do graphic design anymore, there was a part of me that was like, maybe I'm just getting out of art completely, and maybe I'm just doing something else. I mean, I've got a lot of interests. There's a lot of things I want to do. It was just the whole aspect of starting over. And the challenge when there's no income coming in is eventually I'm going to run out of income. And I've had very close calls, very, very close calls, where I was like, oh shit, nothing's happening. And, you know, you mix that with the stuff I've spoken about before, where I'm incapable of doing things either because of clinical depression or ADHD or whatever the case is. And it makes for a really weird soup. And it just isn't great. So this year, definitely, I started thinking, I'm just gonna be measured about how I do things, and I'm going to take every day one day at a time, because it's all I can do. There's going to be days that are bad, going to be days that are good. I have come to the point, though, to realize that life is very much like a heart monitor sort of thing. I mean, our heart goes up and down, right? Roller coasters go up and down. And I know that there's going to be days that are going to be bad. I know it. Not just within art, just in life in general. And I know there's going to be days that are going to be good. And then there's going to be days that are like, there's a day. And some of it, too, has to do with the fact that I got to thinking about a fellow that I'm going to end this on. His name is Nick Drake. Now, if you've not heard of him, I highly recommend going and checking out his albums on YouTube. He's got 3 different ones. Pink Moon is probably the one that's known the best. And he was an acoustic troubadour sort of musician. I don't know his entire history. I do remember when I was very young, my mother listened to a lot of different music, and I believe that was one of the albums, because when I heard the music, I'm like, why is this so familiar? And this was recently. I don't know if I heard it on the Royal Tenenbaums or what it was, where I heard his music, and then I found it on YouTube again. I was like, this is really familiar. And I had spoken to my mom, and she's like, oh yeah, no, I have one of his albums, and I was like blown away, because that acoustic folk rock stuff has always been near and dear to me. I love playing acoustic more than I like playing electric, but I dropped that at a point too. What was weird about this was, as I started reading about this gentleman, I was saddened to find out that he had died. Well, he was depressed. He had a lot of mental illness from what they were able to gather. He was a very fiercely private person. And I guess his sister or his mother, I believe it was his sister, wrote a biography of some sort, either about her life or his, somehow in there. I don't remember all the details on that, but it's mentioned that his mother found him after he had taken some antidepressants, and he'd taken one too many and died. He passed away 2 days before I was born. It was just a weird fucking feeling. You know, it's just a weird thing. And I remember when I was young, I really liked the music, and in no way, shape, or form am I saying that there is a connection, because there's nothing, right? It's just a 2-day difference. I'd have been more creeped out if it had been on my birthday, but not for any real bad reason. The more I read about him and the more I began to understand him, he was an artist he was, I think, a reluctant musician. He created stuff and was happiest doing it in its most simple and honest way. It was him and a guitar. I think his first record was primarily that. I don't own any of the physical records. I just hear the mixes they do on YouTube, so I have to assume that those are the tracks that were produced on those particular albums. Pink Moon has more of an orchestrated sound with a lot more things, strings, horn sections, all sorts of things added to it. And the third and final album he released was Return to his acoustic roots. All 3 of the albums did poorly when they were released. He wrote something at one point about how, you know, it pays homage to the old adage of you don't get famous till you're dead, sort of thing. And unfortunately, that was very much what ended up happening to this gentleman. it's heartbreaking when I think about it, because I don't know about you guys, but there have been times when I've thought about, what would the irony be like, to know, wow, I'm trying to get stories and ideas out there, and maybe it'll be something where, 50, 60 years after I've passed, people come back and they go, man, have you seen this graphic novel? Or did you hear this thing? Or this incredible year-long journey he did in videos, and then that becomes popular. If you guys remember, I think I spoke about this in one of the earlier entries I did, but I also did a little podcast episode about it. There was a gentleman that I when I found his stuff, when I found his YouTube channel, I was really interested. He was a wonderful guitar player and played primarily 12 and 6-string acoustics. And I say that because, like, when I first saw it, I think one of his guitars was 12-string and then a 6-string. I love crazy stuff like that. And, just because I love dual-headed guitars and all this stuff. And I remember that was something that stuck out in my mind. If there's anything I took from it, it was just the same sort of feeling that I found out whenever I was like, oh man, Nick Drake, he died so young and so tragically and so sad, because he felt alone a lot of his life. He felt like an outlier. He was just not somebody that fit in. That's honestly something I feel like all the time. I that sounds weird, right? Because I know that there's a part of me that is far more extroverted. An individual like him, I would surmise, wouldn't even do this shit. There is a weird thing in me that I can't understand. I am probably one of the most, cut back, sort of like I just try to blend in sort of people. But if I'm around people that I think are uncomfortable, or the circumstances uncomfortable, I can't stand that. So I try and do the best I can to, like, come out and do things. Certainly doing shows and doing stuff has made me come out more as, as more of a showman, more of a person that can talk about shit. And maybe some of that is my autism. I have no idea. I have no idea. But with him, with Drake, this Nick Drake fellow, all I could think to myself was, like, what would he think now, now that his music is being used in shows and movies and quoted and that sort of stuff. And I thought about that. It's definitely music that I've listened to while I've been working on World of Ardor. And I was making this playlist sort of thing. It's not a real playlist, but it's going to be on the inside liner notes of the comic book, where I was going to write down different indie artists and singers and musicians that had been part of the journey of creating this. And if I had an imaginary soundtrack for the fictional film that exists of World of Ardor Volume 1, these would be the songs that I would be like, can I cherry pick these? And I would put that on there. And if it was possible, I'm probably going to make a playlist if I can on YouTube, just kind of put everything together and say, hey, you can go here on YouTube and find this playlist, and hopefully it all stays there. That'd be really cool. Yeah, my heart breaks for somebody like that, because as it is, we're all just trying to get through life and create and do things and stay with some semblance of purpose and get things done. And this was a young man that, according to everything I've read and I've understood, he was obsessive with his art, and he was happiest when it was just him and his guitar and just scrawling away, creating new lyrics. When I write poetry, when I've written songs, I've done similar things like that. I mean, you just get into a zone. And but I also wonder too if maybe he hadn't hit a point of burnout or depression that had overcome him. It's a scary thing, but I'm glad that now there's more understanding for that sort of stuff. And for what it's worth, I'm glad that people know who he is. I'm glad that people understand that there are hidden gems from all the decades and performances and things. It's one of the few reasons why I really am happy the internet is what it is, because we can share and we can showcase and we can learn about things that otherwise we'd have long forgotten about. And in a lot of ways, that is the real blessing about the internet, when they say, well, the internet is forever. Yeah, if you do dumb shit, that's terrible. It can ruin your life. You can get canceled into oblivion. But in other circumstances, you can end up discovering stuff that you maybe had nothing to know about on that, it's fascinating. Anyway, that's the entry for tonight. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So this will officially make the 31st. So I made it through a month. That's, yay, yay, yay me. Thanks for watching, guys. For those of you that happen to catch this and everything else like that, I'm going to do periodic introductions of myself again like an idiot, because I know there's a few people that started watching and have mentioned it. And I am Mario Mora. I go by the Artisan Rogue. You can find me across social media, and it shows underneath that moniker. And I'm a writer, an illustrator, and a poet. I do spoken word stuff. I do written prose. Yeah, there's a lot of things that I'm really into, but you'll discover that over this series if you want. I appreciate those of you that do follow and do listen. That means the world to me. I'm always going to say that, because there are times when I really think to myself, like, I am so dumb. Why am I putting this shit out there? No one's going to care. But maybe that's the reason exactly why I'm doing that, just because I'm not that worried about anything going viral or going crazy or anything else like that. It's for fun and for my own record. All right, guys. I'll see you in the next video.